sorry, I'm gonna do it this way. So who am I? What do I do? Why do I do it? That's me when I'm almost 2 in 1978. I'm in the ocean. You can see that I was really happy. I screwed up the animations because I don't really know about Google Slides anymore because I get to teach in a classroom and not on Zoom. Thank goodness. But that's me. And then, can I do it? That's me now. That was me over winter break. I still love being in the ocean. And now I've learned how to surf. I learned how as a grown-up, so I am not very good. I also have to do some unlearning because I taught myself without the benefit of people who knew what they were doing. Sometimes the way we, I don't know, might try to teach ourselves how to talk about things that are tricky for us without the benefit of having anyone to talk to about it. And then maybe we have to unlearn some things. But I really love it, even though I'm not very good and I have to keep practicing. And yeah, so what I do is surf, but also what I do is I teach kids about Black Lives Matter, even over Zoom. And I put this on because that was the 2021 school year. There is a child in that picture, top right, next to my associate, who I met for the first time in person on Monday. I taught that child for a year. And then I actually ended up moving schools so I would have a 20-minute bike commute and not an hour in a subway when there is a pandemic. And I met Emmy for the first time and I got the biggest hug. And the reason I have this one on is not because I liked teaching on Zoom. I really hated teaching on Zoom. I think that we did a very good job, but it was exhausting and I don't want to do it. That year, I said to myself, I don't know how I'm going to do Black Lives Matter at school. Like, this is the thing that I do. I'm like allegedly an expert. I've been doing it for a while. I don't know how to do it on Zoom. I feel really worried. And I tried really hard to be, gracious with myself and relaxed. And I finally did. And this is what we did for intergenerational. I asked all the children to bring a picture that showed several generations of their family and then to tell us about it. And then they did. And I got a lot of really lovely feedback, just like from the children in the moment, but also from their grownups, because grownups were more around and more involved. And it really brought home to me the importance of doing this work all the time, and that teachers are creative and we can think of solutions to terrible problems that we shouldn't have to, but also this happens. And when it happens, it's valuable for children. And that's something that helps me when I'm like, this is really hard, I don't know what to do. Yes, and kids really benefit from it. So that's what I do. And why I do it is because it's really important, which is why you're all here, right? Like, you all know that children are not too young to talk about race. Children notice race. Children see it in the world. And by the time they are in kindergarten, which is the year that I have, children show many of the same racial attitudes that adults in our culture hold. We need to interrupt. We absolutely need to interrupt these narratives. The prevailing attitudes in our culture are not so healthy for any of us in a lot of ways. So we have to give kids alternate narratives all the time, starting immediately. So that's why there's board books, which I didn't bring home, but some of you have seen them. The first conversation books are board books. So it's really important. I'm skipping our community agreements because we're not like gonna have a back and forth because I've only got 50 minutes. So this is the question, like, how do we do this? How to use literature? And the reason I showed this is also Zoom. Again, not my favorite, but so these nuggets are 7/8. No, these are 8/9. These are third graders. These are the 8/9s. And the 8/9s invited me during the week of action, to be fair, to come and do an author share. Now, what's important for you to know is that I had come to their author shares earlier in the year, and they weren't just having me come in February because it was the week of action and I'm a Black person who has book. They invited me to come because I am an author who has a book that I wanted to share, and that they had shared their work with me. And they already knew who I was. Some of them I had taught, some of them I hadn't. But the idea that, guess what? we are authors all the time. And it was really lovely to share my book with a bunch of 8 and 9-year-olds. And one of them said, how did you get the courage to show it to your friend's editor? Which was really cute because I told them the story of how I made my book. And I thought, yeah, that was kind of scary. I just really hoped it would be okay. And I reminded myself that if nothing happened, it would also be okay. And it was a really sweet moment. So we have to do this work all the time, September to June. So here are some things I like to remind people. You might already know these things, but these are some things you might need to remind people. Adult discomfort is not the same as child discomfort. If you've ever met any 2-year-olds, you know that they will happily run around with no clothes on. A lot of grown-ups don't feel comfortable doing that because we are different people. So just because we're uncomfortable with something doesn't mean kids are. And sometimes we're uncomfortable with something because we've learned to be uncomfortable with it. So when we talk about identity, when we talk about race and gender and class and family structure, we've learned to be uncomfortable with it. So we have to practice that. But our kids haven't learned that yet. So let's not teach it to them. So that's the thing to remember. And we didn't learn this way. That's why we're uncomfortable. But kids can. I teach math in a very different way than I was taught it. I like it a lot more. I think it's really important to think about the best ways for kids to learn and then do it, even if it's not what I did, which is another thing I say to grown-ups when they're like, I didn't learn about race this way. And I'm like, oh, but did you learn about math this way? No, because now it's different. It's all right. Be patient with yourself and with others, which can be hard. I felt really guilty about not starting Black Lives Matter at school in November or October the way I used to do when I was on Zoom, because I was like, I don't know what to do. I can't figure anything out. And it was hard. But beating myself up doesn't help. Beating other people up doesn't help. Really lean into your compassion and also accountability. And speaking of accountability, is that we have a responsibility to do this work, especially right now. We've been doing this work. It is working. People are scared, which is why there is an absolutely tremendously kind of unbelievable, except it is true, amount of legislation about trans children happening in our country right now. Who are these people who are like legislating on children? Go away. But it's happening because kids are feeling safe. Grown-ups are helping them to feel safe. People are trying to have legislation about not teaching critical race theory in schools. Guess what? 5-year-olds can't learn critical race theory, but they can learn about skin color. Like, you all don't know what you're talking about, but we have to make sure that we're doing this work. If you teach young children, which is birth through age 8, the National Association for the Education of Young Children has said that it is our ethical obligation to teach anti-bias work. I'm not telling you that because you don't know it. I'm telling you that because sometimes we need something to lean on really hard when someone comes at us about our agenda. Like, this is best practice. And sometimes that can make us feel just a little bit more secure. It gives our administrators something to lean on. It gives people the knowledge that, like, we didn't just make this up yesterday. And we have to really find joy. Like, when kids are talking about who they are and their identity, it's joyful. When I talk about my identity, it's joyful. Like, I'm a queer Black woman. I love being a queer Black woman. My life can be pretty great. When my life is not great, it's not because I'm queer. It's because people might be homophobic. It's not because I'm Black. It's because people might be racist. It's not because I'm a woman. It's because people might be sexist. So oppression doesn't make me happy, but my identity makes me happy. And really locating the problems where they are, right? Like, the problem is not with trans kids. The problem is with transphobic adults. It's the National Association for the Education of Young Children, and there's a document that's going to have resources in it, and it will be in that because it's important. Also, if you are in New York State, which some of you might be, the latest early learning guidelines out of Albany also support anti-bias work. So, talking to kids, be honest. If you don't know something, just say so. It's a great question. I don't know. The same way if a kid's like, how do you say ocean in French? We're like, gosh, I don't know. We could find out. We're like, oh, geez, I don't know if we should talk about that, right? Why do some people look this way? Oh, gosh, let's think about it, right? We know how to do this. We just have to remember, and hold yourself accountable. Have your kid say, like, I'm going to figure this out, or I don't have a good way to answer that right now. Can I think about it and get back to you? And then when the kid gets back to you, have something ready for them. That's important. That shows them that they're respected. Here's something that I have from Jessica, from Our Skin. Even babies notice skin color. Simply talking about it helps children learn it's not a taboo topic. I borrowed these with permission from their Instagram. You can talk to children about skin tone in the same way you talk about all the parts of the body. Being matter of fact is really important. Yeah, First Conversations Instagram has really helped me out because I don't know how to do pictures and graphics and stuff, but they do. So that's important. Be curious with kids the same way you are with everything else. Like if you work with young children, often we say things like, can you tell me more? Or why do you think that? Or what do you think? Or I wonder why. Be curious. Because sometimes kids will say something and you're like, oh boy. But what they're saying, if you find out more, actually isn't that upsetting. The quick story that I sometimes tell is a person I knew was telling me a story about how her kid went on a play date to another kid's house, and the other kid had two moms. And after the play date, she was like, oh, hey, how'd it go? And the kid was like, oh, it was all right. Their house is kind of weird. And the mom's like, oh no, you will not be homophobic on my watch. And like gives this kid a whole lecture about like having two moms is okay, goes on. And the kid's like, yeah, mom, I know. But what was weird was that there was this bird and it was just flying around and I'd never seen that before. And the mom's like, oh, well, I just assumed that. And the kid's like, why would I think it's weird that they have two moms? I don't know what you're talking about. So we might not have grown up with households with two moms, but that doesn't mean that our kids are bringing the same ideas with them. So just find out, what are they thinking? And also be really clear. So metaphors sometimes are really helpful for kids, but sometimes they're not, especially when we're talking about how we treat other people, right? So if a kid says something to another kid that hurts that kid's feelings, we don't have to say it's like anything else. We can just say, your friend is feeling sad, look at their face. When we say things about other people that are not true, or one of the things I talk to my kids about when we talk about identity is like, what are the things you get to choose for yourself that no one else can tell you about? And every year kids say things like, about your family, how you feel, what you call your skin color, your gender, if you did it on purpose. Those are kinds of things. And so we talk about how no one else gets to tell you that. You decide for yourself and you are the expert. And if you have clear boundaries about how you treat other kids, which you do because you're early childhood educators, all of like so many things fall into it. And that's one of the reasons why I just love the principles of Black Lives Matter, because they're all affirmative and they're all like, oh, here's how I run my early childhood classroom all the time anyway. And it makes sense for kids. Definitely. Here's something else from First Conversations. Young children are curious about race and may make a race-related observation near the person they're wondering about. And because we're adults and we've been taught that talking about race is racist, we might feel uncomfortable. But we need to unlearn that, because that's not what kids are saying. Kids are saying, I observe something. I see this thing with my eyes. I'm wondering about it. My first year teaching, a 3-year-old, her mom came to me and she said, I'm really worried, Laleña. I think my child might be racist. And I was like, tell me more. And she said, well, we were walking out of the subway. My kid said, Mommy, why are all the homeless people brown? And noticing that is not racist. If all of the homeless people that you see are brown, you might wonder that. It might be because of racism, but noticing that racism is being enacted is not the same as actually enacting racism. And in the US, we like to pretend that it is. We like to pretend that saying that something is racist is a very big problem. And that is not true. And so we have to make sure that all of our learned behaviors about how to be polite, how to treat other people, what's like appropriate topics of conversation, we have to make sure that we're not bringing that to our kids. We have to do a lot of unlearning so that they don't learn that. Because otherwise, what they learn is that we don't talk about that. And, James Baldwin said, if we can't talk about a problem, we can't solve it, we can't fix it. And also, if kids are learning, well, we don't talk about that, what they're also learning is, well, that's just kind of the way things are. And what they're also learning is, well, that's the way that things should be. And that is not what we want them to learn. That's what a lot of people have learned. And now we have now. I feel like now should be better. And so we need to teach kids to make it better. So here's a book that I use that I actually have brought it home because I wanted to show you. So this book is great because it is nonfiction. And it's also in 2 languages. But so it's like you're not gonna see it, but anyway, we get our skin color for 3 different ways. From our parents and our relatives who lived long ago, called ancestors, from the sun, and from something called melanin. Melanin is tiny grains of coloring in our skin. We can't see them, but we all have melanin in our skin. If you have dark skin, the melanin in your body is very active. If you have light skin, the melanin in your body is not very busy. Our skin also has that. This is the 20th anniversary edition. Like, this book has been out for a while, and it's still fully scientific. It's full of pictures, like actual photographs of actual children. It's really helpful because children need to see actual kids who look the same as them and different from them. It has some things in the back, like activity ideas and a note. It's not as comprehensive as the First Conversation books because it's 20 years older. So luckily, all the First Conversation books, like Our Skin, have a whole thing in the back for grown-ups. And I say to kids, they have all this information for grown-ups because sometimes grown-ups don't know how to talk to kids about this because they haven't practiced. And we're so lucky that these authors helped us out. But I don't read that part to kids. But so yeah, All the Colors We Are. Good book to have. Here's some books that are really old, but are useful just because kids absolutely need to see children in a lot of environments. Kids who look like them, kids who don't look like them, is living their lives. Because it's not just the whole, oh, guess what? Like, we all eat bread, we all love each other. Yes, those similarities are important. And it's also important that kids see other people and know that these people exist and know it in a photographs real life way and not just an illustrations way, because that means that these are humans. And we need to make sure that kids are really thinking about each other's humanity. Here's another book that I have in my classroom, also pretty old, but useful. And this is not a book that I just read to my kids all at once. It's a book that I might read some of it. I might sit with a couple of kids and look at it. It's always around so that kids can look at it. One of the things, I'll talk about that later. But so this is another good book. And it is important to have fiction. So this book I have in my classroom. I found this book the first year I taught 5/6s, which was 2001. So it's a long time ago. And I was so excited when I found this book, and I was an adult when I found this book, but I was so excited. And I tell my kids about how excited I was about it every time I read it to them. And the reason I was excited is that when I was a little girl, I loved dragons. I wanted to play with dragons, but there were no books about little brown girls playing with dragons. Every book that was about a kid and a dragon was about a little white boy. And so I didn't see myself in that book. And I talked to my kids about mirrors and windows. And we talk about how some books are mirrors and some books are windows and some books are sliding glass doors. This is Dr. Rudine Sims, her research on how literature helps children build empathy. And so it's important for all kids to have a mirror to see themselves. And it's also really important for kids to have windows into other people's lives. People need to see these books. And sometimes people will say to me, Laleña, my school is all white. I don't have to do Black Lives Matter at school. And I'm like, I don't know who you think needs to hear that Black Lives Matter, but I bet a bunch of kids in all white school do. And Kids need to see kids who look different from them in the world, in fiction, doing all sorts of stuff. Also because people are forever telling, when people talk about representation, it's super important for me to see myself. It's also super important for the gatekeepers to see myself. Like if 3 little kids are playing and it's 2 little boys and 1 little girl, and the girl says, I'm going to be a doctor, and a little boy says, girls can't be doctors, our response is not to show that little girl lots of pictures of women doctors, because that girl already knows it. Those little boys need it. And if I want to be an astronaut, but like my AP physics teacher doesn't think that women can do science, or my AP calculus teacher doesn't want girls in his class, like I don't need to know that I can be an astronaut. Those people need to know. And they need to know earlier, right? So when we think about who has power and who's gatekeeping, we need to make sure that we have mirrors for us and windows for those people with power. So this is a book that I'm excited about. And this book I always share because Megan Madison, who co-wrote all the First Conversations books, found this book at a curriculum share that I did at the Earth School in New York like 6 years ago. I was like, oh my gosh, a mirror book. And I love that both of us found books with little brown girls and dragons, and it makes me really happy. That's really important so that kids can see this and grownups can see it and kids can see themselves and other people. And now I want to talk about systems and stories. So we have to talk about these things because Black Lives Matter School is about justice. It's not just about representation. It's about justice. And we can't talk about justice without talking about systems and stories. So I want to talk a little bit about systems of oppression, but this is racism, white supremacy, which is a system of power that values everything associated with white people over things associated with Black people. A lot of us know this. Also, systems of oppression generally work the same way. They're not creative or original, which is why we have to be really creative and original in combating them. And these systems of oppression operate on many levels. So there's institutional ones that are big and make systems. And there's interpersonal ones, which is how we treat each other. And the internalized ones, the cop in your head. In the US, we love to pretend that all oppression is interpersonal. Like we love to pretend that as long as we're all kind, racism will go away. As long as no one says girls can't play, there will be no more sexism. And those are very important things. And also we have systems that make it so there's a mommy track. We have systems that make it so the people who are most deeply affected by this pandemic that is still going are people of color and women. Like the people who have lost their jobs are people of color and women because of systems and stories and the institutionalized way that those things happen. So this is how I explain systems to kids. I'm going to take a drink and you all can read it. I came up with this because when a kid asked, how did all this start? I had to explain that there's a story that's been told for a long time about how white people are better than Black people. And we have systems that people have put into place to try to get other people to believe those stories and to keep telling those stories. And the reason I bold the part that's like systems are made and put into place by people is because that means that new systems can be put into place by new people. We can tell new stories and we can make new systems. And even more importantly, our kids can tell new stories and our kids can make new systems. And we have to make sure that they know that, because otherwise, if we talk about any kind of oppression, we will all just sit in our trauma and it will be terrible. We don't want to do that to kids. We need to think about what can we do, and to realize that these all the implicit stories are the things that are the really harmful narratives. That's what we need to interrupt. So that's what we're gonna do. And then Megan and Jessica came out with this book. This is their board book that I photographed to show because I was so excited about this. And these books came out like, oh, so similar to the time. And Megan and I were talking about all of these things, and it's very exciting. But, you know, a long time ago, way before you were born, a group of white people made up an idea called race. They sorted people by skin color and said that white people were better, smarter, prettier, and that they deserve more than everybody else. This isn't true or fair at all, but it's a story that has been told for a long time. There. I wish I had this when I was in college talking about race. Like, I wish everybody could just see this. It's very clear. When people believe this untrue story about race, that's called racism. It's also the things people do and the unfair rules they make so that white people get more money and are treated better than everybody else. It's all around us, even if we don't already always notice it. And I remember talking to my kids about this photo the other day. And it was, about this illustration. And it was really interesting, the things that children notice. They're like, those kids on the stairs look excited. They look like they're having a party. And that other kid is noticing. And maybe she doesn't want that other kid to get in trouble, but she doesn't know what to say. And thinking about what that might mean, right? Like, what do we do when we observe racism? How do we become upstanders? That's a really important thing. So in case you were wondering about how to explain systems and stories to kids, ta-da, it's there. These are the principles of Black Lives Matter at school. They are all things that are pretty essential to classrooms. There's a few that are harder for little kids, like globalism, because long, go, and far away is hard, but intergenerational, not so much. There's all these things. There's a teacher's guide that will also be in your resources, and it needs to be updated because all of the first conversation books weren't out yet, but now they are. And that's why I brought books home, because because a long time ago I didn't have all these books. Here's another book that I like to use called Cool Cuts. I feel like it's a good mirror and window book. It's about different kinds of haircuts that kids can have. And this is one that a lot of kids in my class really like. It's called Grandma's Purse. Pretty fun. And then I really love Peanut Butter Fudge by Toni Morrison. It's really fun, and unlike a lot of books written in verse, it actually flows. You're gonna see it all. It's in the. I have a whole list of books. Don't worry. And then I want to talk a little bit. 1:30. All right, we're doing great on time. This is a picture of me before the pandemic, talking to kids. This is not a picture of me using a book, but it's during the week of action. So we talk about the principles all year long, and during the week of action, we talk about the demands, because an activist has to have demand. They have to say, this is what we want. That's important. So here I am with a bunch of 5- and 6-year-olds. They are now much bigger. I just saw a couple of them on Monday. They're very funny. So here, I'm gonna go back. So when I introduce Black Lives Matter at school to kids, I say, like at a community meeting, oh, today we're gonna talk about Black Lives Matter. Like, do a brain match if you've heard those words. In my school, brain match means you like are thinking the same thing or you've heard it. What do you know about Black Lives Matter? And it's just a KWL, like a what do you know? What do you want to know? And then we might go back and talk about what we've learned. But so what do you know? And in 2021, when I was teaching on Zoom, nope, wrong thing. Darn it. There we go. This is what kids said over Zoom. So one time we're going on the street, it was blocked out on the street, it said Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter means that people with black skin and white skin can do things together. Daddy has a shirt that says Black Lives Matter, and I saw a few houses with signs that say Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter means that it doesn't matter if you are black or white or even a peachy color. It just means that you can be together. When we're protesting or having a march, we can say Black Lives Matter, or no justice, no peace, for the world to be better and the president to be better. It can mean a lot of things. Black Lives Matter means that even black skin people matter. So white skin people shouldn't be saying that white people are better. And they shouldn't be thinking about other people that way. Black Lives Matter is because some people sometimes are not treated equally, but they should be treated equally. Black Lives Matter means people with brown skin or African people are important. No one should treat them different from white people. They should be treated equally. So that's what my 5 and 6-year-olds said. This year, when I asked kids about what they know about Black Lives Matter, they knew a lot less. It is no longer 2021. I'm also at a different school, so that might have something to do with it, but kids may or may not know a lot. That's okay. Kids may or may not know about reading or about math. We still teach them. So what I then do is I show them a poster. We have new posters now. I'm very excited, from the new books, the new illustrations from How We Can Live. And so I say, oh, here's a poster. It has one of the principles of Black Lives Matter. I'm going to read it to you. And then we're going to read a book that reminds me of this poster. And then we do. And then I put the posters up on the wall, and they're there all year long so the kids can refer back to them, which they do. I'm going to talk about questions at the end if there are times. That's a great question. So sometimes we read books, like I read this book and my kids were like, that book reminds me of Loving Engagement. And I could, this is another book that we read called From the Stars in the Sky to the Fish in the Sea. And one kid just like shook her head and she said, ugh. It's about a kid who's isn't a boy or a girl. And the kid shook her head and she said, ugh, those kids just needed some transgender affirming. And later that same kid, this in April, at just a random work time, what was open was like colored tape and paper, and Sam made this, and she just wanted to make it. It was just what she was thinking about. We weren't talking about Black Lives Matter at that moment. We hadn't probably talked about it in a day or two, maybe a week. Like we'd already gone through all the principles. And then another day at drawing, one of my kids made this. So when it's around, kids are able to internalize it and to know that, like, oh, at any given moment, I might be thinking about it, and maybe I have another question, but that's okay. We're thinking about it. Also, teaching kids and literature involves talking to families. This is what a lot of grown-ups, teachers, this is the part that teachers like least, right? Like, we're not so worried about our kids, but we spend a lot of time worrying about grown-ups because grown-ups can be scary. One of the things that's important is to let grown-ups know that you're going to be talking about social justice or identity or current events or whatever you think you're going to talk about. I tell them at curriculum night. That way it's not a surprise. Communicate often. What's really important, so I used to write weekly notes, now I write bi-weekly notes. I like it a lot better. What's coming up, what happened, and then what did kids say? Because when grown-ups hear what kids actually say, they're like, oh, no one talked about police brutality? Oh, no one talked about like something horrifying and like terribly inappropriate? Oh, kids were matter of fact and like I just had a question. Oh, and like that helps them to feel more relieved and to really feel like, oh, I don't have to be scared about this. Like, I'm uncomfortable, but my kid's not. And reminding them that this is what is happening. And also know your institutional supports. So what's your school's mission statement? Does it say anything about creating global citizens or a better society or justice or making all children feel welcome or all families feel welcome or whatever it is? See if there's something in there that you can lean on. And that's a really important thing. The National Association for the Education of Young Children has position statements and guidelines to help us out. Just be like, oh, guess what? I didn't just make this up. This is actually supposed to happen. If you're in New York, the New York State Early Learning Guidelines are also a really important thing to think about. This is an excerpt from an email that I sent. We're going to continue to discuss it, and identities and activism, we're doing these things. I have some links. I'm like, here's the website, you can look at it. And then I say, you know, when we discuss current events, social justice, or anything with children, to remind them that we're using the same pedagogical approach that we use for all of the other things we do, we make sure to make lots of space for them to tell us what they know and what they're wondering about. We're honest and clear by using age-appropriate language and concepts. With regards to Black Lives Matter, we strive to center Black joy rather than Black trauma. Children often already know about the struggle. So we also offer additional narratives of joy and celebration, as well in the case of Cece and Laleña, that was my co-teacher that year, our own lived experiences as whole, joyful, and compassionate queer Black women. So being really clear with grown-ups about what's happening can help them just to feel, people fear what they don't know. It's like, oh, we're talking about this, and like, it's fine, and kids are happy, and they're excited, and they're learning a lot of things at school. That can really help people to just not feel afraid. And that is super important. I'm gonna talk, so a lot of times people are thinking about the principles. They're like, queer affirming, trans affirming, it's really hard. Luckily, the NAUIC supports us. And here is a book called Supporting Gender Diversity in Early Childhood Classrooms, a Practical Guide. And that's what it is. So it helps us to know about the gender binary and how we can not continue that narrative and how we can interrupt that story that there's only two genders, which is big. And then here's the thing from First Conversations, it's one of my favorites, which is patriarchy might seem like a big word for little kids, but so is Tyrannosaurus. And kids can learn about patriarchy, and kids can learn that it's not okay. And kids can say things like, that's a stereotype, that hurts kids. That's one of the things that I teach kids to say. Like, if you notice something, you can say something. And they like that. And we need to know, kids know there's nothing natural, inevitable, or fair about any of our systems of oppression. So it's really important that we teach them these things and give them other narratives. We can all do feminine things. All of us could be princesses if we wanted to be. It's not okay to say that someone has to be a princess, but it's really okay for everyone to be a princess. So that's really important. And then there's these great books about gender identity and families that, so It Feels Good to Be Yourself has drawings, but is pretty much nonfiction. It's just very fact-finding-y. And it's just, hey, this person is a trans girl. It means this. This person is a cis boy. It means this. This person is non-binary. Like, there are so many ways to be a girl or a boy or non-binary, too many to fit in a book. It's really helpful for grown-ups. And it's helpful for us, especially right now, as we're dealing with really horrific possible legislation that's happening in our country. And then this book, Queer Little Feminist Families, has just really great pictures of queer families. And the new book by Jessica and Megan has some other great depictions of different kinds of family structures. And I'm very excited about it. We read that book with my kids last week, and they were really into it. Here's another book. I brought it home. When Aiden Became a Brother. It's by my friend. Full disclosure, I know Kyle, and Kyle helped me get my book published, but I loved this book before I even had a book. Yes, there's so many good books. And what Kyle said to me about this book when he was writing it years ago, he said, I'm writing a book about a trans kid and nothing bad happens to them. And I was like, that is powerful. That's important. So guess what? Nothing bad has to happen to a kid just because they're trans. Being trans isn't a problem to be solved. And then I brought this book home too. It's so funny. I like this book. Harry Gets Carried Away. It's about a little brown girl who likes to dress up. Also, she has two dads. But what's really important is that she ends up with a bunch of penguins. So that is important. I don't think I'm gonna read Key right now. I don't think we're gonna play Key right now. But can I do the next thing? Hang on. I just want to make sure.
Out on the dance floor, we love to sing They. They is a way to let everyone be. No one left out.
We'll see what happens next, right? That is, so actually we have a little bit of time. Can I get a thumbs up? Like, should we watch this video of Key Gross about kindergarten, or should I answer questions? You can put it in the chat, or you can do let's see, what are your options for, I think you could do questions. Sounds great. I'm like really, there's a question in chat, Bob. All right, I'll take that question. And if we have time for watching this book. Also, this is available on Woke Kindergarten, which is in the resource guide that you all will get. So you all can go watch everything from Key, which is fabulous, including the 60-second text on Martin Luther King, which I think is so wonderful. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen because I'm gonna take your questions because you all have access to Key in this other way. All right, so I'm gonna answer this question about our skin and give you my opinion. Jessica, if you feel like you want to say anything, you can, but you also do not have to because you did not show up here to do this work. You came to listen and do the work in a different way. So we are 3 through kindergarten teachers, so that means 3-year-olds, I'm assuming. Yes, 3-year-olds, Carrie? Yes, okay. Are considering not reading the pages that are about systems. Can I please share my thoughts on it? I think that you should read those pages. I think that because children by age 3 have already internalized these ideas, we are not helping them by making them wait to question these ideas. And children like one of the things I want to say, oh no, your spelling bee practice. Oh, you have a post about it. Oh my gosh. So definitely read what Jessica wrote in the chat. They have a lot of information. I love the educator's guide and I haven't even gotten a chance to dig into them. So thank you so much, Jessica. That's really appropriate and helpful and wonderful. I will say that if we don't give kids tools, then we are making like so you have to wait to fight racism till you're older. Like that, and that's not the way that our internalized implicit stories work. Like a lot of the oppression that happens in our world is implicit. Most people won't say these things. And one of the things that I notice is if I say to my kids, hey friends, what are some things that people think are true about girls and boys? They will say, some people think that only girls can like pink, but that's not true. Everybody can like every color. Or some people think that only boys can like sports, but that's not true. Everybody can like every color. But no one says, what are you talking about? So they have been like, their grown-ups have interrupted that story for them. Their grown-ups have been like, these things are not true. And that's important. But these kids are not like, what? Some people think that? I've never experienced that in my life. And we can't protect kids from these ideas while they're out there all the time. Like our kids see billboards. They walk around their cities. They ride a subway. They have watched a Disney movie. They've read a book. We can't control all of that. People say things like, oh, my two-year-old boys are running. They're in the mud. Oh, they're boys. They like mud. Like those things just fall out of people's mouths. And so no matter what we are doing right now, like maybe in 100 years, it'll be different. But like right now, we have to talk about it because they are getting these messages. And when we have a world where they're not getting those messages, I will probably change my mind. But that is what I think about those pages. And what the other thing that I know, and that we all kind of know, when we think about like kids and like when people talk about sex ed, oh my God, if children are really, truly not ready for something, they're just not curious about it. They're not going to ask about it. They're deeply uninterested. So if they are not able to like think about all these people with all of these systems and these like long ago and far away, like some of it isn't going to make sense to them, right? Because they're little, long ago and far away, Friedrich Blumenthal, like who knows? They're not going to know about that guy. But it is important that we talk about systems and stories, and we talk about what people can do, which happens in all of those books. It's like what people are doing, what kids are doing to make things more fair. So I would say that they should read those pages. I think it's really important. All right, here's another question. Have I ever had parents who are cops? If so, how have you handled that, especially in the context of conversations about police in the classroom? All right, I personally have never had a parent who is a cop. When we have conversations, I also have had very few conversations about police in the classroom. And they're almost always in response to the counselors, not cops, part of the demands. And so I know that Megan Madison and Anjuma Jordan have a really thoughtful Patreon video that is about the police as community helpers, which is what happens in some schools. Like, we're doing community helpers, here are the police, and like how to talk about that. What I can also say is that when I talked about, you know, we want counselors, not cops. A counselor is somebody who like talks to kids about their feelings. One of the things that one of my kids said was, well, the police are experts on criminals, so they learn about criminals, but teachers are experts on kids because they go to teacher school. But if police are in schools and they're experts on criminals, maybe they will think that kids are criminals. And I was just like, well, kid, like, you're 6, you just described the school to prison pipeline. Well done. And yeah, like, when we think about what is the job of a teacher, what is the job of grown-ups in schools, and who, like, kids know that teachers learn how to be teachers, and then we learn a lot about kids, so we're experts on kids, and they know that the police are experts on kids. And you can handle that as, how would they have time to become experts on kids? Or you can handle it as, this institution was not meant to protect children, it was meant to protect property. Depends on like the age of the kids that you are thinking of. And if kids are talking about, I mean, I would probably need a little more like context about, you know, police in the classroom, but who helps kids to make really good choices? Who really knows about kids? What makes us feel safe? Like, what are the things that happen? I know a lot of schools in New York have had really great conversations that are like, what makes us safe? And kids are like, I feel safe when people know my name. I feel safe when people say my name the way I like it. I feel safe when I know the people around me. I feel safe when I've spent time with people. I feel safe when I can have a disagreement with somebody just about their ideas. And kids of all ages, and those are mostly like middle and high school students, but like when we think about if the idea is what makes us feel safe, most people don't say the police. And there are ways that we can make sure that we are all safe in school. And that's what we're thinking about. Because we're not thinking so much about the professions of everyone's grownups, right? Like, I probably have some kids whose parents are like iBankers or work on Wall Street. That doesn't keep me safe, but I'm not talking about it because that doesn't come up all the time. I hope this is helpful for the person who asked that question. I see there's something. The letter to parents, thank you. How much I go into historical segregation, those who were against it, good books. I think it's important to talk about historical segregation and also current segregation. So like, if we're teaching kids that Ruby Bridges like did this great thing. So Ruby Bridges is what, 68, 69? So she's younger than my parents. New York City has the most segregated school system in the United States right now. Here we are. So I think that it's important, like when I talk about history, one of the things that I think is so important is that we talk about how we don't say like laws were made, people made laws. Like, we don't, like, it's important that we don't use passive voice and we don't act like everything's in the past. And I think for K-3, long ago and far away can be hard. I mean, but as kids get older, like I know that 3rd graders often do long ago right here. I think it's important for kids to know absolutely that anytime something is unfair, people resist. Those stories are the most important. And I think centering like, hey, here's this thing that's happening. People didn't like it. People did all these things to fix it is really, really important. And then when we talk about like Black resistance and Black joy, like that's what we're talking about. Like, we don't need to necessarily talk about the trauma because guess what? Kids will know that. Kids will know that people were enslaved. People will know that kids might not know that white people enslaved other people. And that's important because people made decisions, right? People were like, I will go buy myself some oxen and some horses and some mules and some people. Absolutely. I did my senior essay on enslaved children, and reading these people's diaries, like that's what they talk about and that's how they thought about it. But that's what they did. And they may not have thought of them as people, but that is a problem. That's one of the really horrific things about enslaving other people, is that you deny their humanity. And letting kids know that some people acted as though people weren't people. That's the story they told themselves so they could feel okay about owning other people. So historical segregation, it really, I think it's the against, and that like people have been working for many years with other people. I think the solidarity component is important to make things better for their communities. The Museum of the City of New York has a really great New York City activism exhibit that I think is available as a virtual experience. And it just talks so much about ways that communities keep themselves safe and do things for themselves. And I know that folks on the East Shore of Maryland, Barbara Richardson and Mamie, forgetting her last name, are all women who organized their neighborhoods. And I know that, forgetting Mimi's last name, but like Barbara Richardson was a woman who organized on the East Shore of Maryland, and RFK like came to her and was like, look, you organize this boycott and it is like killing your city. And she was like, yeah, what are you gonna do about it? And he was like, well, how about you stop it? And she's like, how about you give my people some jobs? Like, we'll stop it when they hire us. And RFK had to go back to Washington and be like, all right, we got to do something. So definitely those stories. And woke kindergartens, MLK, like, I think it's like Ann Martin, I'm forgetting the name of it, but there's stuff out there for kids, and a lot of it is great because it has what some people call like a low ceiling, I mean a low floor and a high ceiling. So like kids of a lot of ages, even grown-ups, can watch these things and they're going to bring different things to it. But that's what I think is great about the books that I wrote, and a lot of these things that like no one's too old or too young for it. They're just going to come in from where they are. 154, I did it. Whew. First, thank you for sharing your resources in the chat also, people. That's really great. Yeah, I think just really like we have to celebrate joy and resistance, and also joy, and living our lives and having adventures with dragons. Because when I was a kid, if there's a book about a Black person, they were definitely enslaved or fighting in the civil rights movement, but they weren't like going about their life doing whatever it is that they do. And Black people, we do a lot of stuff. We're not just always out fighting oppression, you know, we live lives. So that is really important. And so thank you all very much. Yes, Ann Martin, thank you so much. See, this is why learning communities are so great, because we can support each other, and solidarity work is, you know, possibly the most important thing we can teach kids, right? Like being an upstander when you see something that's not okay, doesn't have to be about you. So yay. Thank you all so much.